The text message chimed just as I finished arranging George's framed photo beside his urn. Sorry we can't make it today. Traffic is terrible. Please send details about the will reading. I stared at my phone, my hands suddenly cold despite the June heat pouring through the funeral home windows. 47 years of marriage, and his own daughter couldn't be bothered to say goodbye. I placed the phone face down on the table, smoothed my black dress, and finished arranging the white roses George had always brought me on our anniversary, one for each year together. The funeral director hovered nearby, sympathy etched into the lines of his face. He'd seen this before. Families suddenly appearing when money was involved, vanishing when actual grief work needed to be done. Mrs. Reynolds, we're ready whenever you are, he said softly. I nodded, unable to form words around the stone in my throat. 2 days ago, I'd lost my husband of nearly 5 decades to a heart attack that came without warning. Today, I would say goodbye without his children by my side. Stephanie lived just 40 minutes away in normal traffic. Her brother Ryan, barely 2 hours. Yet somehow the funeral of their father wasn't worth the drive. The small chapel filled with our friends, elderly couples we'd known since our 20s, neighbors from our street, George's bowling teammates, and my garden club ladies who arrived bearing casseroles and comfort. The front row, reserved for family, remained conspicuously empty except for me and my sister Judith. No one mentioned the absence of George's children, but I felt it like a physical wound. Pastor Miller spoke beautifully about George's life, his 40 years at the manufacturing plant, his volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity, his ridiculous dad jokes that somehow never got old. People shared stories that made us laugh through tears. George would have approved. After the service, everyone gathered at our home. The house George and I had purchased as newlyweds, where we'd raised his children after their mother abandoned them, where we'd celebrated Christmas and birthdays and graduations. Eleanor, I'm so sorry about Ryan and Stephanie, my friend Margaret whispered as she helped set out food in the kitchen. It's just unforgivable. I arranged deviled eggs on a platter, focusing on making perfect concentric circles. They're busy with their lives. I said automatically the excuse I'd been making for years when they missed holidays or forgot birthdays. Margaret snorted. Too busy to say goodbye to their father? The man who raised them single-handedly after Patricia ran off with that insurance salesman? The man who worked 2 jobs to put them through college? The truth of her words stung, but I kept arranging eggs. Let's not talk about it today, I said quietly. Throughout the afternoon, I moved through my home like a ghost, accepting condolences, refilling coffee cups, making sure everyone had enough to eat. My sister Judith rarely left my side, her solid presence the only thing keeping me upright. As evening approached and the last guest departed, I collapsed into George's recliner, still shaped to the contours of his body. The house felt cavernous now, filled with echoes and memories. Judith sat across from me, kicking off her shoes with a sigh. You should stay with me for a few days, she offered. This house is too big for just you. This is my home, I said simply. Our home. I'm not going anywhere. Just then, my phone chimed again. Another text from Stephanie. Sorry again about missing today. Ryan and I would like to come tomorrow to discuss the will and Dad's things. Is Tenem okay? I showed the message to Judith, whose face darkened instantly. The nerve, she muttered. They couldn't make time for their father's funeral, but they sure can make time for his possessions. They're grieving too, I said, though the words felt hollow even to me. That's not grief, Eleanor. That's greed. Judith took my hand. You don't have to see them tomorrow. You can take time. But I knew I would. Despite everything, they were George's children. He had loved them fiercely, forgiven their neglect repeatedly, saved every school drawing and report card, attended every graduation even when they'd made it clear they'd rather he not bring his new wife, never mind that I'd been in their lives since they were toddlers. I'll be fine, I assured Judith. I need to face this sooner or later. After she left, I wandered through the quiet house, touching George's things, his coffee mug in the dish drainer, his reading glasses on the end table, his cardigan hung over the back of a kitchen chair. Small pieces of a life suddenly ended. In our bedroom, I opened his closet and buried my face in his shirts, breathing in the scent of him that still lingered there. On his dresser sat the small wooden box where he kept his wedding ring when he was working in the garage or garden. I opened it now, expecting to find the simple gold band we'd purchased when money was tight and promises were all we had. Instead, I found a folded piece of paper alongside the ring. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Eleanor, my love. It began in George's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry to have left you. There are some things you need to know. I sat heavily on the edge of our bed, scanning the letter with growing disbelief. George had known about his heart condition for months, but had hidden it from me to spare my worry. He'd made arrangements, spoken to lawyers, organized his affairs, and he'd made decisions about his will that would likely cause a storm when revealed. Ryan and Stephanie have never appreciated what they have, he'd written. Maybe it's my fault for trying too hard to make up for their mother leaving. But I've watched how they've treated you all these years, the woman who packed their lunches and bandaged their knees and cheered at their games when their own mother couldn't be bothered. I've made provisions for them, but not what they're expecting. The bulk of our estate will go to you, as it should. You were my heart, Eleanor, my true family. I read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and returning it to the box. A strange calm settled over me as I prepared for bed, sleeping on my side of our king-sized mattress, the other side achingly empty. Morning came too quickly. I rose early, showered, and dressed in a simple blue dress, George's favorite color on me. At 9, I called the florist and placed an order to be delivered to the house. At 9:30, I made coffee and set out cookies I had no appetite for. At 10 sharp, the doorbell rang. Stephanie arrived first, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing designer sunglasses she didn't remove upon entering. She air-kissed my cheek, the scent of expensive perfume washing over me. Eleanor, you look well, she said, as if we were meeting for lunch rather than the day after her father's funeral. I'm so sorry about yesterday. The traffic on I-95 was just impossible. Before I could respond, Ryan's BMW pulled into the driveway. He entered without knocking, his manner brusque, dressed in a business suit as if he'd scheduled our meeting between more important appointments. Sorry about Dad, he said, giving me a brief, awkward hug. It was sudden. I gestured to the living room. Please sit down. Would either of you like coffee? They made themselves comfortable on the sofa where their father had spent his last evening alive, watching baseball and holding my hand. Neither accepted coffee. So, Ryan said, checking his watch discreetly, about Dad's will. We know this is difficult, Stephanie added, though her tone suggested impatience rather than empathy. But there are practical matters to address. I took a deep breath. Your father's lawyer will contact you about the formal reading of the will. That's scheduled for next week. Ryan frowned. But surely you know the general provisions. The house, the savings, Dad's retirement accounts? The doorbell rang, saving me from answering immediately. Excuse me, I said, rising to answer it. The florist stood on the porch with 2 enormous bouquets of white roses, identical to those we displayed at George's service yesterday. Right on time, I said, signing for the delivery. Please bring them in. I directed the florist to place the arrangements on the coffee table in front of Ryan and Stephanie, whose expressions shifted from confusion to discomfort. What's this? Stephanie asked, eyeing the funeral flowers with distaste. I waited until the florist departed before speaking. These are from your father's funeral. The funeral you couldn't attend due to traffic. I kept my voice level, my gaze steady. I thought you might like to have them, since you missed the service. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Look, Eleanor. Mrs. Reynolds, I corrected quietly. You've called me Eleanor since you were 12, Ryan, but today I'd prefer Mrs. Reynolds. His face flushed. Mrs. Reynolds, then. We've said we're sorry about missing the funeral, it couldn't be helped. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Priorities must be set. Stephanie removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes remarkably like her father's. That's not fair. We loved Dad. I'm sure you did, in your way. I sat across from them, hands folded in my lap. Just as I'm sure you're concerned about his will because you want to honor his wishes. An uncomfortable silence filled the room, punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock George had restored the year he retired. Dad always said we'd be taken care of, Ryan finally said. The house, his savings, the cabin at the lake. Your father made his own decisions about his estate, I interrupted gently. The lawyer will explain everything next week, but I want to be clear about something today. They both stared at me with identical expressions of wary anticipation. For 47 years, I loved your father with every breath in my body. I stood by him when your mother left. I helped raise you. I supported his dreams and shared his burdens. I was there for every success and every failure. My voice remained steady, though my heart pounded. And yesterday, I buried him without his children by his side. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears, whether from genuine remorse or frustration at my unwillingness to discuss the inheritance, I couldn't tell. We didn't mean to hurt you. And yet you did. I replied simply. You hurt him too, year after year, with your absences and excuses. He forgave you every time. He made excuses for you. He loved you unconditionally. Ryan stood abruptly. We don't have to listen to this. Dad knew we loved him. Did he? I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Just then, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. George's lawyer. Excuse me, I need to take this, I said, stepping into the kitchen. The call was brief but illuminating. When I returned to the living room, Ryan was pacing while Stephanie examined the collection of family photos on the mantel, photos that chronicled decades of a family life they had increasingly chosen to absent themselves from. That was Mr. Davidson, your father's attorney, I said. He wanted to let me know he's emailed you both about the will reading, Tuesday at 12. Did he say anything about the provisions? Ryan asked immediately. I met his gaze steadily. That's between you and Mr. Davidson next week. I gestured to the flowers. Please take these with you when you go. They're your connection to yesterday's service. Stephanie stood, affronted. You're asking us to leave? We just got here. We haven't even talked about Dad's things. Your father's possessions aren't being distributed today. I said firmly. Today was meant for condolences, for memories, for shared grief. I paused. But since that's not why you came, there's no reason for you to stay. Ryan grabbed his sister's arm. Come on, Steph. We're not welcome here. This was Dad's house too, she protested. And now it belongs to whoever is named in his will, Ryan replied tersely. We'll find out Tuesday. He turned to me, expression hard. We'll see ourselves out. Neither of them took the flowers. After they left, I sank onto the sofa, exhaustion washing over me. The house fell silent again. But this time, the silence felt different, charged with a decision made and a boundary drawn. I thought of George's letter, tucked safely away in his ring box. I thought of the will they would hear next week, the provisions George had made that would likely shock them both. But most of all, I thought about the roses. Dozens of white blooms symbolizing a love that had endured nearly 5 decades, a love neither of George's children had bothered to honor in its final earthly moment. Tomorrow, I would take those roses to his grave myself. They belonged with him, not with the people who couldn't spare a few hours to say goodbye. I picked up our wedding photo from the side table, George and I, impossibly young, beaming at each other as if we were the only two people in the world. In many ways, despite his children and our friends and the life we'd built, it had often felt that way. George and Eleanor against the world. I miss you, I whispered to his smiling face. But I'm going to be okay, I promise. For the first time since his death, I believed it might be true. The weekend crawled by in a haze of grief and memory. I found myself talking to George as I moved through our home, telling him about the neighbors who dropped off more food, the church members who'd called to check on me, the cardinal that visited our bird feeder, his favorite. You'd be proud of me, I told his empty chair Sunday evening. I stood my ground with the kids, but even as I said it, a familiar guilt crept in. Had I been too harsh? George had always been the peacemaker between us, gently suggesting I give Ryan and Stephanie more grace, more chances. They're struggling with their own demons, Ellie. He'd say after another Christmas they'd missed, or birthday they'd forgotten. Patricia really did a number on them when she left. I'd always bitten my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that George's first wife had left when Ryan was 5 and Stephanie just 3. They barely remembered her. I'd been the one to raise them, making Halloween costumes, attending parent-teacher conferences, nursing fevers, and mending broken hearts. But somewhere along the way, as they grew into adults, they'd rewritten their own history. In their version, I was the interloper, the replacement, the woman who'd stolen their father's attention. The doorbell rang Monday morning, just as I finished my coffee. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But years of good manners prevailed, and I smoothed my hair before answering. Margaret stood on the porch, a determined expression on her face. "Get dressed," she announced. "We're going out." "Margaret, I appreciate the thought, but—" "No buts. It's been 3 days since George's funeral, and you need air that doesn't smell like sympathy casseroles." She stepped inside, looking me over critically. "Wear something nice, not funeral clothes." Half an hour later, I found myself in Margaret's car, wearing a blue sundress, and feeling oddly like a teenager being kidnapped for an adventure. Margaret had been my friend since our children were in elementary school together. Her son Michael had been the same age as Ryan, their friendship extending through high school until Michael's death in a car accident at 19. The tragedy had nearly broken Margaret, but somehow she'd rebuilt herself into someone even stronger, even more determined to wring joy from life. "Where are we going?" I asked as she drove past the turnoff to our usual lunch spot. "You'll see," Margaret grinned, a mischievous expression that reminded me we'd once been young women together, sharing secrets and dreams. She pulled into the parking lot of Davidson Associates, the law firm that had handled George's affairs for decades. My stomach nodded immediately. "Margaret, the will reading isn't until tomorrow." "I know," she turned to face me. "But James Davidson is an old friend, and he agreed to see you privately today, to prepare you." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Prepare me for what?" Margaret's expression softened. "Eleanor, you know how Ryan and Stephanie are. Once they hear the will, they're going to come at you with everything they've got. James thought it would be better if you knew exactly what you're facing. No surprises." I closed my eyes briefly, remembering George's letter. "I already know, Margaret. George left me a letter." "Even so, legal language can be tricky. Let James explain everything clearly, and then we'll go have a nice lunch and a glass of wine, and tomorrow you'll be ready." James Davidson had been George's friend since college, their bond surviving marriages, children, careers, and retirement. His office was warm and welcoming, with leather chairs that had softened with age and walls lined with family photos interspersed with law degrees. Eleanor, he said, coming around his desk to embrace me. How are you holding up? I'm taking it day by day, I replied, the phrase becoming my mantra. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. George was very concerned about how all this would affect you. He made me promise to look after your interests. He left me a letter, I said. I know he changed his will. James gestured for me to sit. Yes, about 6 months ago, after his diagnosis. The diagnosis he kept from me, I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. He thought he had more time, James said gently. He didn't want your last months together overshadowed by illness. I nodded, tears threatening. That sounds like George. James pulled a file from his desk drawer. Before we go through this, I want you to understand that George thought long and hard about these decisions. He consulted me extensively. Everything was done properly, legally. There can be no successful challenge. Ryan and Stephanie will try, I said, certain of it. They can try, James smiled grimly. They won't succeed. For the next hour, he walked me through the provisions of George's will. Though I'd had some warning from the letter, hearing the details laid out in precise legal terms was still shocking. When James finished, I sat in silence, trying to absorb it all. This will destroy my relationship with them, I finally said. With all due respect, Eleanor, did you ever truly have a relationship with them? From what George told me over the years. I sighed. I tried. For decades I tried. But you're right. They tolerated me at best. George knew that. James said kindly. This wasn't a decision he made lightly or in anger. He simply wanted to recognize the people who truly made his life meaningful. You, first and foremost. After leaving James's office, Margaret took me to lunch as promised. Over salads and white wine, I told her the details of the will. Her eyes widened with each revelation. George was always smarter than people gave him credit for, she said when I finished. Ryan and Stephanie are going to lose their minds. I almost want to change it, just to avoid the conflict, I admitted. Margaret reached across the table to grasp my hand. Don't you dare. George knew exactly what he was doing. Honor his wishes. That night, I slept poorly, imagining the scene that would unfold in James's office the next day. By morning, I felt exhausted but resolute. I dressed carefully in a navy pantsuit George had always admired, pinned his mother's cameo brooch to the lapel, and drove myself to the law office. Ryan's BMW and Stephanie's Lexus were already in the parking lot when I arrived. Taking a deep breath, I entered the building, the weight of George's decisions heavy on my shoulders. They were waiting in James's conference room, both looking impatient. Stephanie's husband Todd sat beside her, while Ryan's wife Melissa was notably absent. Neither rose when I entered. "You're late," Ryan said by way of greeting. I checked my watch. Actually, I'm 5 minutes early. Before he could respond, James entered with his paralegal Patricia, who would witness the proceedings. James made brief introductions, then took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he began formally. "We're here for the reading of the last will and testament of George Henry Reynolds." I watched Ryan and Stephanie exchange glances, their anticipation palpable. For most of their adult lives, they'd viewed their father primarily as a source of financial support. College tuition, down payments on homes, bail money when Ryan had his DUI, the loan to save Stephanie's failing boutique, and now, they clearly expected their final payday. James began reading the standard legal preamble, then moved to the specific bequests. "To my son, Ryan George Reynolds, I leave my collection of vintage fishing gear and memorabilia, including all rods, reels, lures, and related items, which have been appraised at a value of approximately $8,000. Ryan's face flushed red. "That's it? Just the fishing stuff?" James continued as if there had been no interruption. I also leave to my son the sum of $10,000, with the hope that he will use it wisely. 10,000. Ryan's voice rose incredulously. Dad was worth at least $1 million. Ryan, Stephanie hissed. Let him finish. James cleared his throat. To my daughter, Stephanie Ann Reynolds Caldwell, I leave my mother's collection of antique jewelry, with the exception of the cameo brooch, which goes to my wife Eleanor. The jewelry collection has been appraised at approximately $12,000. Stephanie's lips pressed into a thin line. And? I also leave to my daughter the sum of $10,000 with the same hope expressed to her brother. The silence in the room was deafening. Stephanie gripped Todd's arm so tightly, her knuckles turned white. This is a joke, right? Ryan finally said. Where's the rest of it? The house? The retirement accounts? The lake property? James adjusted his glasses. I'm getting to that. Now, to the residuary estate. Both siblings leaned forward intently. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, of whatever kind and wherever situated, including but not limited to our family home, the lake property, all bank accounts, investment accounts, retirement funds, insurance proceeds, and any other assets not specifically bequeathed above, I give, devise, and bequeath to my beloved wife, Eleanor Marie Reynolds, to use as she sees fit, with no restrictions or conditions. The explosion was immediate. This is bull! Ryan slammed his hand on the table. She's not even our real mother. I was married to your father for 47 years, I said quietly. She manipulated him, Stephanie accused, turning to James. Dad would never have cut us off like this. She got to him when he was sick, took advantage. Your father made these changes 6 months ago, James interrupted. When he was of completely sound mind, I verified it myself. He was clear and firm about his decisions. We're contesting this, Ryan declared, looking at his sister for confirmation. Right now. On what grounds? James asked mildly. Undue influence, Stephanie snapped. Dad was sick. Your father had a heart condition that eventually took his life, James said. His mental faculties were never affected. Furthermore, these changes align with his consistent estate planning philosophy over the years. The percentages have shifted, but the basic structure has not. That's a lie, Ryan insisted. Dad always said the house would come to us. Always. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Your father changed his mind when you refused to visit us more than once a year, when you both missed our 45th anniversary party, when neither of you bothered to call him on his 70th birthday. Stephanie turned on me, eyes blazing. How dare you? We had lives, careers, families of our own. So did your father, I said evenly. A life you weren't interested in being part of unless you needed something. This is pointless, Ryan stood abruptly. We're getting our own lawyer. This won't stand. James remained unruffled. You're welcome to try, though I advise against wasting your money. I have extensive documentation of your father's wishes, including video of our consultation, where he explicitly states his reasons for the changes. That gave them pause. Video? Stephanie asked. Yes. George anticipated this reaction and wanted to leave no room for doubt. Would you like to see it now? Ryan and Stephanie exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Perhaps this would be easier to accept if you understood your father's reasoning, James continued. The video is quite clear. Play it, I said softly. I hadn't known about any video, but I wasn't surprised. George had always been thorough. James nodded to Patricia, who set up a laptop on the conference table. A moment later, George's face appeared on the screen. My heart clenched at the sight of him, healthy, clear-eyed, very much alive. He sat in the same conference room, looking directly into the camera. I, George Henry Reynolds, being of sound mind, make this statement of my own free will, without coercion or undue influence from any person. His voice was strong, authoritative, the voice he'd used when making important family decisions. I am making significant changes to my will today, and I want to explain why. He shifted in his chair, hands folded before him. I've worked hard all my life to provide for my family. I've been blessed with 2 children and a wife who has been my partner in every sense of the word for nearly half a century. In my earlier wills, I divided my estate equally between my wife Eleanor and my children Ryan and Stephanie. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. However, in recent years, it has become clear to me that my children view me primarily as a source of financial support rather than as a father. They rarely visit, rarely call, and have shown little interest in maintaining a genuine relationship with either me or Eleanor, who helped raise them after their mother left. Ryan made a strangled sound but didn't interrupt the recording. In contrast, my wife Eleanor has stood by me through every challenge, celebrated every joy, and created the home and family I always wanted. She is my true partner, and at this stage of our lives, her security and comfort must be my priority. George leaned toward the camera. Ryan, Stephanie, if you're watching this, it means you're contesting my will, exactly as I predicted you would. I want you to know that this decision comes from clarity, not confusion or manipulation. I love you both, but I don't approve of how you've lived your lives or treated your stepmother. The modest bequests I've left you reflect both my disappointment and my hope that you might finally recognize what truly matters in life. He sat back, his expression gentler now. Eleanor, my love, I'm sorry to put you through this. Know that every decision I've made is to protect you and honor the life we built together. The video ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. Stephanie's face had crumpled while Ryan stared stonily at the blank screen. As you can see, James said into the silence, your father's wishes were quite clear. Ryan stood abruptly. This isn't over, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He stalked from the room without looking at me. Stephanie remained seated, tears streaming down her face. He really thought we only cared about his money, she whispered. What else were we supposed to think? I asked gently. You couldn't even make it to his funeral. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. That was, we just. Stephanie, Todd said quietly, we should go. She allowed him to help her up, but paused at the door. Eleanor, Not now, I said, suddenly exhausted. I can't do this now. After they left, James offered me a glass of water and a moment to collect myself. You did well, he said. Did I? I felt hollow, as if some essential part of me had been carved away. George knew this would happen, this fracture. He knew, and he did it anyway. He did it to protect you, James corrected, and to finally hold them accountable for their choices. I nodded, gathering my purse. Thank you, James, for everything. Where will you go now? I hadn't thought about it, but the answer came easily. The lake house. I need some time alone. The cabin at the lake had been our sanctuary for decades. Situated on a quiet cove with a wraparound porch and windows that captured the sunset, it was where George and I had celebrated anniversaries, recovered from illnesses, and simply retreated when life became too much. We'd offered to host family gatherings there many times over the years, but Ryan and Stephanie always had excuses. The location was too remote, the accommodations too rustic, the drive too long. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, memories washed over me. George teaching neighborhood children to fish off our dock, summer evenings playing cards on the porch, winter weekends by the fireplace with books and hot chocolate. This place held the best of us. Inside, everything remained exactly as we'd left it after our last visit in early spring. George's flannel shirt still hung on the hook by the door. His coffee mug sat beside the sink. His worn paperback rested on the nightstand. I moved through the room slowly, touching his things, remembering. For the first time since his death, I allowed myself to cry without restraint. Great, heaving sobs that bent me double and left me gasping. I cried for the husband I'd lost, for the family that had never truly accepted me, for the painful scene in James's office, and finally, for the overwhelming uncertainty of my future alone. Eventually, the tears subsided. I made myself tea and carried it to the porch swing that faced the lake. The June evening was perfect, warm, fragrant with pine, the water glittering like scattered diamonds in the fading light. George should have been beside me, his arm around my shoulders, pointing out the osprey diving for fish or the family of ducks paddling along the shoreline. Instead, I sat alone, my grief a physical presence beside me. Yet as darkness fell and stars appeared above the lake, something shifted inside me, not an end to sorrow, but the first fragile tendril of acceptance. George had made his choices, difficult as they were. Now I would have to make mine. My phone, which I'd silenced before the will reading, buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find multiple missed calls and texts from both Ryan and Stephanie. They'd left voicemails too. Ryan's angry, Stephanie's tearful. There were also messages from friends checking on me. The latest text was from Margaret. "How did it go? Are you okay? Call me." I set the phone aside without responding to anyone. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face the aftermath. Tonight belonged to George and me, to our memories, to the quiet beauty of the place we'd loved together. As I rocked gently in the swing, I remembered something George had told me during our last visit here. We'd been watching the sunset, much like this one, when he'd squeezed my hand and said, "No matter what happens, Ellie, remember that the most valuable thing I'm leaving you isn't money or property. It's the certainty that you were deeply, completely loved every day of our life together." At the time, I'd laughed softly and kissed him, not recognizing the gravity behind his words. Now, they came back to me as the gift they were intended to be, not just comfort, but direction. Whatever came next with Ryan and Stephanie, whatever challenges widowhood brought, I would face them knowing I had been cherished by a good man who had chosen me, again and again, right until the end. I was loved, I whispered to the night. I am still loved. The stars reflected on the dark water, constant and bright, as I sat with that truth until sleep finally claimed me. I woke with the sunrise, stiff from sleeping in the porch swing. The lake was perfectly still, mirroring the pink-streaked sky like a watercolor painting. For a moment, I imagined George inside making coffee, the familiar sounds of morning in our special place. Then reality settled back around me like a heavy cloak. After a hot shower and strong coffee, I finally checked my messages. Ryan had left 3 voicemails, each progressively more hostile, culminating in threats of legal action. Stephanie had left tearful messages asking to talk, saying there had been a misunderstanding about the funeral, insisting they had always loved their father. Margaret had called twice, worried about me. "Call when you can," her last text read. "I'll drive up if you need company." I sent her a quick reply. "I'm okay. Need time alone. We'll call later." As I was setting the phone down, it rang in my hand. "Stephanie." I hesitated, then answered. "Eleanor?" Her voice was tentative, lacking its usual confident edge. "Are you there?" "Yes," I said simply. "I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about yesterday. About the will." I sighed, moving to the porch where I could watch the morning unfold over the lake. "I don't think there's much to discuss, Stephanie. Your father's wishes were clear." "That video doesn't represent who Dad really was," she insisted. "He must have been confused or manipulated. The father I knew would never have done this to us. The father you knew, I repeated quietly. When was the last time you really spent time with him, Stephanie? Not a rushed holiday dinner or a quick visit when you needed something. Really spent time getting to know the man he'd become. Silence stretched between us. I don't want to fight, she finally said. I want to understand. I think George made his reasoning very clear in the video. He said we only saw him as a source of money. Her voice cracked. That's not true. We loved him. Love is more than a feeling, Stephanie. It's showing up. It's being present. It's making difficult choices to prioritize relationships. Another long pause. Ryan's talking to lawyers, she said, changing tactics. They think we have a case for undue influence. Is that why you're calling? To warn me about Ryan's legal threats? No, I don't want this to get ugly. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised us both. It's already ugly, Stephanie. You and Ryan couldn't be bothered to attend your father's funeral, but you're willing to fight tooth and nail for his money. That's not fair. We had legitimate reasons. Save it. I interrupted, suddenly weary. I'm not interested in more excuses. If Ryan wants to waste money on lawyers, that's his business. James already explained that you won't succeed. This isn't about the money, she protested. It's about what Dad intended, what he always promised us. Your father changed his mind, I said simply. He watched how you lived your lives, the choices you made, the way you treated him, treated us, and he changed his mind. She began to cry, soft hiccuping sobs that made her sound like the little girl I'd once comforted after nightmares. Despite everything, my heart ached for her. I have to go, I said gently. If you want to talk again, call in a few days. I need time. After hanging up, I spent the morning cleaning the cabin, finding comfort in the familiar routine of sweeping pine needles from the porch, washing windows, changing linens. It was past noon when a vehicle crunched over the gravel driveway. I tensed, expecting to see Ryan's BMW or Stephanie's Lexus. Instead, Judith's practical Honda pulled up beside my car. She emerged carrying grocery bags and wearing the determined expression I knew well. Don't be mad, she called, approaching the porch. Margaret told me where you were. I brought supplies. Relief and gratitude washed over me. I could never be mad at you, I said, holding the door open. Judith bustled in, immediately making herself at home in the kitchen she knew almost as well as I did. Margaret told me about the will reading, she said, unpacking fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of wine. Those ungrateful brats really showed their true colors, didn't they? They're hurt, I said, automatically defending them as I'd done for decades. Judith paused her unpacking to look at me directly. Eleanor Marie, when are you going to stop making excuses for them? They're fully grown adults who couldn't be bothered to say goodbye to their father. And now they want his money? I know. I sank onto a kitchen stool. Stephanie called this morning. Ryan's talking to lawyers. Let him waste his money. Judith sliced bread with emphatic strokes. James Davidson is too smart to have left any loopholes. It's not about winning a legal battle, I said. It's about what comes after. Do I just never see them again? Never know my grandchildren? Judith's expression softened. Oh, honey, is that what you're worried about? That they'll cut you off from the kids? The tears came without warning. They're all I have left of George. Judith set down her knife and came to wrap her arms around me. Listen to me. You are not alone. You have me. You have friends who love you. And those grandchildren adore you, regardless of their parents' foolishness. I nodded against her shoulder, drawing strength from her certainty. Besides, she continued, once the dust settles and they realize they can't bully you legally, they'll come around, especially when they need babysitting. That startled a laugh from me. You're probably right. I'm always right. Now eat something. You look exhausted. We spent the afternoon on the dock, talking about George, sharing memories and tears and occasional laughter. As evening approached, Judith reluctantly prepared to leave. Come home with me, she urged. Stay a few days. I shook my head. I need to be here right now, in our place. She squeezed my hand. Call me tomorrow, or I'll drive right back up here. After she left, I wandered down to the water's edge, watching the sunset paint the lake gold and crimson. The beauty was almost painful in its intensity, the kind of moment George and I would have shared in appreciative silence, his hand warm in mine. I miss you, I whispered to the fading light. I don't know how to do this without you. As darkness fell, my phone chimed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Grandma, it's Emma. Can I come see you tomorrow? Just me. Mom doesn't know I'm texting you. Emma was Stephanie's 15-year-old daughter, a thoughtful girl who reminded me of George with her quiet observations and unexpected humor. My heart lifted at the thought of seeing her, even as I worried about going against Stephanie's wishes. I'd love to see you, I replied, but I don't want to cause problems between you and your mom. Mom and Dad are fighting about Grandpa's will, she texted back. It's awful. I miss you and I miss him. Please? Okay, I relented. I'm at the lake house. Do you need me to pick you up somewhere? No, my friend Zoe can drive me. She just got her license. We'll come after school, around 4. I spent the next day preparing for Emma's visit, baking her favorite cookies and tidying the already clean cabin. At 4:15, a compact car with a novice driver sticker pulled into the driveway. Emma emerged, waving goodbye to her friend, then bounded up the porch steps and into my waiting arms. Grandma, she murmured against my shoulder. She'd recently hit a growth spurt and now stood eye to eye with me. But in that moment, she felt like the small child who'd once clung to my legs. Inside, she settled at the kitchen counter while I poured her lemonade and set out cookies. Mom would kill me if she knew I was here, she said, breaking a cookie in half. She told us we're not supposed to contact you until the legal issues are resolved. And yet here you are, I said gently. Emma looked up, her eyes, so like George's, serious. It's wrong what they're doing. Grandpa loved you so much, everyone could see it. And Mom and Uncle Ryan. They never came to see him. Not really. I reached across to squeeze her hand. It's complicated, sweetheart. No, it's not. Her voice held the clear certainty of youth. They're being selfish. They always have been. Emma. It's true. Remember last Christmas? When Grandpa wanted everyone to come to the lake house, but Mom and Dad insisted we had to go to Vale instead. And Grandpa was so disappointed, but he didn't say anything. Her eyes filled with tears. That was our last Christmas with him, and they ruined it. I moved to sit beside her, pulling her into a hug. Your grandfather understood. He wasn't angry. Well, he should have been. She pulled back to look at me. I heard them, you know, after the will reading. Dad said they should contest it, but Mom was saying maybe Grandpa was right. Maybe they hadn't been good children. And then they started fighting about whose fault it was. I sighed. It doesn't matter now. What matters is healing, moving forward. Emma wiped her eyes. I have something for you. I found it in Grandpa's study when we were at your house after the funeral. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small leather-bound book. I think it's his journal. I read some of it. I hope that's okay. I took the book with trembling hands. I'd known George kept journals. He'd started the practice in his 50s as a way to make sense of the second half of life, as he put it, but I'd never read them, respecting his privacy. I think he'd want you to have it, Emma said softly. We spent the next hour on the porch swing, Emma telling me about school, her friends, her dreams of becoming a marine biologist. As the sun began to set, She reluctantly checked her phone. I should go. Zoe's coming back for me. She hesitated. Are you going to be okay, Grandma? I smiled at this child trying to take care of me. I'm going to be fine, one day at a time. After she left, I held George's journal, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. Finally, I opened it to the first page. The entry was dated 6 months ago, around the time he must have received his diagnosis. Saw Dr. Matthews today, he'd written in his precise handwriting. The news isn't good. Heart failure, advanced. Treatment options limited. 6 months to a year, he says. Didn't tell Ellie yet. Need time to process this myself first. Need to put things in order. I turned pages slowly, tears blurring my vision as I read George's private thoughts during his last months. His fears, his practical planning, his deep love for me, his disappointment in his children. Spoke with James today about changing the will, one entry read. He advised caution, worried about challenges from RS, but I've made up my mind. They've made their choices for years, consistently choosing distance over connection. Meanwhile, my Eleanor has been everything a man could ask for in a partner. She deserves security, peace. The kids have had every advantage, every opportunity. They'll be fine without another windfall they haven't earned. Another entry, just weeks before his death. Ellie suspects something's wrong. Caught her watching me at breakfast, concern in those beautiful eyes. I hate keeping this from her, but I don't want our last months overshadowed by illness and grief. Want to give her more ordinary days of happiness before the storm hits. Selfish, perhaps. But time is the one thing I can't leave her, so I'm trying to make what remains count. The final entry, dated just 3 days before his heart attack. Anniversary trip to the lake house this weekend. Might be our last visit to this place we've loved so much. I've left letters for everyone. Ellie, Ryan, Stephanie. James knows where they are. We'll distribute after. Hope they understand, especially my girl. She deserves the world. I couldn't give her that, but I gave her everything I had. Hope it was enough. I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest as if I could absorb George's words directly into my heart. In some ways, it was harder knowing he'd been aware of his impending death, making plans, saying goodbye in his own private way. Yet there was comfort, too, in his certainty, his clear-eyed assessment of what mattered most. My phone rang, startling me. Stephanie's number. Eleanor, is Emma with you? Her voice was tight with anger and worry. She left about 20 minutes ago. Her friend Zoe was picking her up. She told us she was studying at the library. I can't believe she went behind our backs like this. I sighed. Stephanie, she's a teenager who wanted to see her grandmother. Don't be too hard on her. That's not your call to make, she snapped. You should have told me she contacted you. She's 16, not 6. She can make her own decisions about who she wants to see. Not while she's living under my roof. Stephanie's voice cracked slightly. And not while we're in the middle of this situation with Dad's will. Is that what we're calling it? A situation? What would you call it? I thought for a moment. I'd call it the natural consequence of choices made over many years. Silence stretched between us, then, surprisingly, Stephanie's tone changed. Emma said you're at the lake house. Yes. Are you okay there, by yourself? The question, with its hint of genuine concern, caught me off guard. I'm managing, I said finally. It helps, being in a place where we were happy. Another pause. I used to love it there, she said softly. When I was little, remember the summer Dad taught me to water ski? I remember, I said, surprised she would reference a memory that included me. You were so determined, you fell a dozen times but kept getting back up. You made those special blueberry pancakes every morning. Your favorite. A long silence followed. Ryan hired a lawyer, she said finally. He wants me to sign on to the case too. I close my eyes. And will you? I don't know. Her voice was barely audible. Todd thinks it's a waste of money and energy. Says Dad made his decision and we should respect it. Todd always was sensible, I observed. I'm angry, she admitted. At Dad, at you, at Ryan, for pushing this, at myself, for everything. I know, I said gently. I need to go. Emma just got home. Don't be too hard on her, I said again. I'll try. After we hung up, I sat with George's journal, watching darkness settle over the lake. That brief conversation with Stephanie felt like the first honest exchange we'd had in years, possibly ever. Not a resolution, but perhaps a tiny opening. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since George's death. It was time to go home. Time to start figuring out what my life would look like now. I packed my few belongings, cleaned the cabin one last time, and locked the door behind me. The drive home took me past the cemetery where George was buried. On impulse, I turned in, navigating the winding paths to his grave. The headstone was still temporary. The permanent one wouldn't be ready for another few weeks, but someone had placed fresh flowers at the base, not the white roses from the funeral, but bright sunflowers. George's favorite. A small card was attached. I knelt to read it. Grandpa, I miss you every day. Love, Emma. Tears pricked my eyes as I sat beside the grave, tracing George's name on the marker. She's so much like you, I said aloud. All the best parts. I told him about the will reading, about Ryan's threats and Stephanie's confusion, about my conversation with Emma. I don't know how to fix this, I admitted, or if it can be fixed, or even if it should be. A gentle breeze rustled the sunflowers, their bright faces turning slightly as if listening. But I think I know what you'd say. I continued. Do what brings peace, Ellie. Life's too short for bitterness. I smiled sadly. You always were wiser than me. I sat there until the sun was high overhead, feeling George's presence in the warmth on my face, the scent of fresh-cut grass, the distant laughter of children visiting other graves. Finally, I rose and brushed grass from my slacks. I'm going to be okay, I told him. I promise. At home, the emptiness felt less oppressive than before. I moved through the rooms, opening windows, letting summer air freshen spaces that had been closed up with grief. In the study, I found the letter George had mentioned in his journal, an envelope addressed to Ryan and Stephanie in his handwriting, sealed and waiting. I called James Davidson. George left letters for his children, I said when he answered. In his journal, he mentioned you knew where they were. Yes, James confirmed. He left them in my care, along with one for you. I was instructed to distribute them after the will reading. In the confusion yesterday, I forgot. He paused. Would you like me to send Ryan and Stephanie's letters to them directly? I thought about the tentative conversation with Stephanie, about Emma's secret visit, about the sunflowers at George's grave. No, I decided. I'll deliver them myself. Are you sure that's wise? Probably not, I admitted, but it's what George would want. After hanging up, I went to our bedroom and opened the closet we had shared. George's clothes still hung there, a tactile reminder of his absence. Slowly, methodically, I began removing items, his suits for donation, his favorite sweaters and shirts to keep. Among his things, I found a small box tucked in the back corner. Inside were treasures he'd saved, the card I'd given him on our first anniversary, ticket stubs from concerts we'd attended, a pressed flower from our wedding bouquet. Beneath these mementos lay a thick envelope with my name written on it. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find pages of George's handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, it began. If you're reading this, I've left you alone, something I swore I'd never do. I'm so sorry, my love. I sat on our bed, surrounded by George's clothes, and read his final words to me, his gratitude for our years together, his reflections on our shared life, his hopes for my future without him. Don't let bitterness take root, he wrote toward the end. Ryan and Stephanie made their choices as I've made mine, but there's still time for healing. Not for my sake, I'll be beyond caring, but for yours. You deserve peace, Ellie. You deserve joy, even without me, especially without me. He ended with a line from the poem he'd recited at our wedding. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. My love for you never altered, and death itself cannot change that truth. I held the letter to my heart, tears streaming down my face, not the desperate sobs of fresh grief, but the gentler tears of remembrance and gratitude. In that moment, I knew what I needed to do. The next day, I called Stephanie. I'd like to see you and Ryan, I said when she answered. Together, there's something important I need to give you. Is this about the will? She asked warily. No, I said. It's about your father. She hesitated. Ryan's not speaking to me right now. I told him I wouldn't join his lawsuit. This surprised me. Why not? A long pause. Emma had quite a lot to say when she got home from seeing you. About Grandpa's journals, about how we treated him. Her voice caught. About how we treated you. Stephanie. She was right, she interrupted. We've been awful. For years. I don't know why exactly. It was just easier to keep our distance, to pretend we were too busy, to blame you for taking Dad's attention when the truth is. She took a shaky breath. The truth is, we took him for granted. We assumed he'd always be there waiting whenever we decided to make time. I closed my eyes, absorbing her words. There's still Ryan. I'll talk to him, she promised. I can't guarantee he'll come, but I'll try. 2 days later, they both arrived at the house, Stephanie looking nervous, Ryan stone-faced. I led them to the living room, where I'd prepared coffee and the cookies they'd both loved as children. Thank you for coming, I said formally, taking a seat across from them. Your father left something for each of you. I handed them the sealed envelopes bearing their names. They took them wordlessly, staring at their father's handwriting. Before you read those, I continued, I want to explain something. The changes George made to his will weren't about punishing you. They were about acknowledging reality. The reality of the relationships we actually had, not the ones we pretended to have on holidays and special occasions. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Whatever he wrote in those letters is between you and him, but I want you to know that I'm not your enemy. I never was. I took a deep breath. I also want you to know that while I'll honor George's wishes regarding his estate, this is still your family home. You're welcome here, both of you and your families, anytime. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. Why would you say that? After everything? Because it's what George would want, and because life is too short for bitterness. Ryan finally spoke, his voice rough. I don't understand you. We've been terrible to you for years. We skipped Dad's funeral and then showed up asking about the will. We threatened legal action. Why would you want us in your life at all? I smiled sadly. Because you're all I have left of him. And because beneath all the hurt and misunderstanding, I still remember the children I helped raise. The boy who brought me wildflowers from the backyard. The girl who insisted I teach her to make pie crust just like yours, Eleanor. Stephanie made a small sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I'd forgotten about that. I was, 10? 9, I said. You got flour everywhere. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Dad was so proud of that lopsided apple pie. Ryan looked down at the envelope in his hands. I don't know if I can read this yet. Whenever you're ready, I said gently. There's no timeline for grief. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of all our shared and separate losses filling the room. Then Ryan cleared his throat. I told the lawyer to stop the preparations for contesting the will. He wouldn't meet my eyes. It wasn't right. Thank you, I said simply. Stephanie reached for a cookie, breaking it in half the way she had as a child. Could we maybe come for dinner sometime? Bring the kids. I'd like that very much. When they left an hour later, nothing was resolved. Not really. Decades of distance couldn't be bridged in one afternoon. Ryan hadn't opened his letter, tucking it instead into his jacket pocket for later. Stephanie had read hers in silent tears, then folded it carefully without sharing its contents. But they had both accepted my invitation to dinner the following weekend, a small step toward something. Not the close family bond George had always hoped for, perhaps, but a beginning. That evening, I took the white roses from George's funeral, now dried but still beautiful, and carefully pressed them between the pages of his journal. Then I sat in his chair, surrounded by the life we'd built, and began writing my own journal entry. Today, I gave Ryan and Stephanie your letters, I wrote. I don't know if they'll understand or accept what you tried to tell them. But I've decided to focus on what I can control, my own choices, my own forgiveness, my own path forward. You taught me that life is precious and short, too valuable to waste on bitterness or regret. Outside, the sun was setting in a blaze of color. Inside, the house felt different, still filled with memories, but somehow lighter, as if making space for new possibilities. I'll always miss you, I continued writing. That empty place will never completely heal, but I promise to live fully, to find joy where I can, to keep my heart open. It's what you would want. It's what I want, too. I signed the entry and closed the journal, placing it beside George's on the bookshelf. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own grief, its own moments of unexpected grace. But for now, in this moment, I felt George's presence in the gathering twilight, in the silence that was no longer quite so empty, in the promise of family, however imperfect, gathering around my table once more. I hadn't just given Ryan and Stephanie their father's letters. I'd given them something else entirely, the chance to begin again, the invitation to recognize what truly matters before it's too late. The reminder that love, while not always easy or perfect, is always worth the effort. As I turned on the lamps against the coming darkness, I smiled, remembering something George used to say. The most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, it's knowing how to love well. Perhaps in the end, despite everything, that would be his true legacy.